Hello, my friends. It is Uncle Mike, and today is June the 30th, and it has been a while. I hope that each of you are doing well. I've been taking a little bit of a break, I suppose, but I think I'm ready to get back in the saddle again. And so today is going to be a fun one. We are going to do a little bit of synchromystic storytelling via Hollywood through the movies. I haven't done this for a while. So let us hold on to our hats and see if let's see if I can make some sense out of what I'm about to walk you all through. So we're going to be talking about 3 different movies, or actually, 5 different movies. And we're going to see how there is actually 2 different cohesive storylines which are found in these 5 movies and how complementary they are. And we'll see, if we can make a little bit of magic, see if we can make a little bit of lemonade, if you will, with the information which we are going to be looking at. Now, this all began spontaneously enough in a conversation I had with Emily on our Playing the Glass Bead Game video series. I'll link that down in the notes below if you want to see how and where this began. But from that conversation with Emily is what we are going to have today. And so we're going to begin by, let's talk about the 5 movies that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at 12 Monkeys, The Sixth Sense, Looper, and then Fight Club, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And we're going to be following the storyline of 2 different, it's just one storyline, but we're going to see it played out through 2 different actors, Bruce Willis, and through these 3 films, and then Brad Pitt through these films. And this is where it all begins in this 12 Monkeys. So we'll first go down this line. Let's begin with 12 Monkeys. I'm pretty certain, I know because I saw that there is a TV series which had been based upon the movie 12 Monkeys. I'm not familiar with the TV series, or I'm not familiar with it in the fact that I haven't seen it. I just know that it exists. So we're going to be focusing on the movie. And so this movie, if you're not familiar with it, it came out in 1995, and it stars Bruce Willis and Madeline Stowe and Brad Pitt. And the theme of this movie, there are a couple different themes. So the idea of the film, if you're not familiar with it, is it starts in the future, and the Bruce Willis character is a prisoner somewhere in the future, and he is sent back in time. He's eventually going to get back to 1996 because at that point there was a virus released on Earth, and it has very detrimental impacts in the future. So he's going back in time and he's trying to stop the release of the virus. And they believe, at least you're told in the beginning of the film, that it is a underground group known as the Army of the 12 Monkeys who are responsible for the releasing of this virus. We find out that that's not the case at all. We find out that it was actually a scientist who released the virus. But nonetheless, the movie is about going back in time and trying to stop the release of this virus. And so what we see in this film is there's a theme of virus, which obviously makes it somewhat relevant to the movie which is being projected on humanity right now, the ARG, which is being projected into reality, trying to be created into a real reality, if you will. We're dealing with time travel, but even more so, we're dealing with time loops. So it's not just time travel, but time loops. We're also, the film takes place in both Baltimore and Philadelphia. And so I indicated that the inspiration of what I'm going to be talking about today came from a show which I do with Emily, which we call Playing the Glass Speed Game. But then this also bumps up against another show which I do regularly with Roz Ben, which is from the 40th parallel, and Roz Ben is in Philadelphia. So the beginning of this film, or even this whole talk which I'm doing today, it also blends over personally, synchromistically, to other content, other programs which I've been putting out. And then the last theme which we see in this film is the younger self seeing the older self. And so what happens in this film, you've got the Bruce Willis character who is sent back in time. He is the main character, and during his stay in the past, he spends some time in an insane asylum, in a mental hospital, which is where he meets this Brad Pitt character, who we're going to be looking at also, his storyline. But this is where they connect. They connect right there. And what happens is he goes and he tries to stop the virus and all this sort of stuff and escape, and there's a love interest and that sort of stuff. And at the towards the conclusion, or the climax of the film, is that he is shot. He's going, he identifies that the cause of the virus is a scientist, not this army of the 12 monkeys. And he goes to the airport and he attempts to shoot to shoot the scientist, but he gets shot instead. So he dies in the airport. And the reason why that's significant is in the film, we see that the Bruce Willis character has a recurring dream throughout, the character's life of maybe being shot in an airport. And you recognize, as the events unfold in the climax, that this dream that he's having, this premonitional dream which he's having, is playing out. That's what happens in this final scene in the airport. But then you go and you see that there's this little boy who witnesses this shooting, and that little boy turns out to be the young Bruce Willis. So there's this time loop which is being implied, which is the young Bruce Willis sees the older Bruce Willis being shot in the airport, and then he'll eventually grow up and somehow become the prisoner and be sent back in time, and then he's going to go see his death again, and blah blah blah. So that is our time loop, and this is going to make sense when I'm talking about it in a moment. So let's now move on to the next film which we want to talk about in this particular line, this 12 Monkeys, Sixth Sense, and 2012, or Looper, excuse me. So The Sixth Sense, probably more people are familiar with The Sixth Sense, and to be quite honest, I haven't seen any of these films for a very long time. I remember them, and I had to read up on them on Wikipedia, and I remembered what it was about. I did watch Looper for the first time prior to making this video, so that, it makes sense, but a lot of this is going by memory. So The Sixth Sense, if you recall, The Sixth Sense was a hugely successful, popular film, and it also stars Bruce Willis. This is our linkage. And so in this film, The Sixth Sense, Bruce Willis plays a psychiatrist, maybe a psychologist, some sort of therapist who works with young children. And he works with this young boy, and then the end of the film, like, you know, the big reveal at the end of The Sixth Sense is the fact that Bruce Willis is actually a ghost, and he doesn't realize he is a ghost. And so this film came out in 1999. This film came out 4 years after the 12 Monkeys. And so let's go and talk about some of the characters, or some of the themes within The Sixth Sense. You know, one is it takes place in Philadelphia. So it is also the same setting as 12 Monkeys. It's Philadelphia. The Sixth Sense, it is, you know, it's making reference to the fact that this young boy is able to communicate with the dead. So that's The Sixth Sense. Another theme in this film is not knowing who you are, or what you are, because the Bruce Willis character thinks he's alive, and we find out later in the film that no, in fact, he's actually dead. You know, we can look at this metaphorically, we could look at this metaphysically, you know, you can look at it any way you want, but, you know, that's what happens in the film. And then also a big part of this, our theme within this movie, The Sixth Sense, is that it is about helping young children, helping a child. You know, the Bruce Willis character was a child therapist, and you know, the second leading role in the film was played by a young boy. So let's go a little bit deeper into, you know, this transition from the 12 Monkeys to The Sixth Sense. So obviously we have Philadelphia. There's a connection right there. Well, first off, you know, there's the obvious connection with Bruce Willis, and then Philadelphia. So the setting is in the same place. So now let's go look at the names. The names are really interesting. So in the right here, this is the 12 Monkeys. I probably should have done it the other way around. But Bruce Willis, the character in Bruce Willis's character in 12 Monkeys was James Cole. And we see that the young boy in The Sixth Sense, his name was Cole Sears. So we have this Cole connection. And, you know, that also, if you've been playing along or following along for a while, you know, Cole is part of like another one of the storylines, which I talk about specifically as it relates to anthracite and this huge coal deposit, which is found beneath the cities of Scranton and Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. But, you know, and coal is a metaphor, you know, the coal and it turns into a diamond. That's, you know, seemingly that's not how things work, but nonetheless, it's part of like the story which we're told of how material reality works, that diamonds, which really don't deserve the monetary value which our culture gives them, but nonetheless, we're told that this very, very valuable crystal is formed from coal. So, you know, we can look at all of these different sort of metaphors, if you want, of what coal is. But nonetheless, these characters are both named Cole. And we see also that that the love interest whom we see in 12 Monkeys, you know, there's a similarity with the names also, because this was played by Madeline Stowe. And in The Sixth Sense, we have the Bruce Willis character. His name is Malcolm Crowe. So it's not exactly the same, but they're more similar than less similar, like Malcolm and Madeline, and then Crowe and Stowe, and they're spelled the same way. And then just to add on to the similarity of names is the love interest in 12 Monkeys is Dr. Catherine Rayleigh, and the Cole Sear character in The Sixth Sense is played by Haley Joel Osment. So we got Rayleigh and Haley. So we've got a lot of this kind of like wordplay. And then we could also look at how, you know, in a very general way, you know, they don't look like identical twins, but in a very general way, there's a physical similarity between the young James Cole from the 12 Monkeys who witnesses his own murder, and then we go and we see this Cole Sear. You know, they're similar age, similar coloring, similar hair, and that sort of stuff. And so that's definitely an implication, if we want to go, you know, when we're looking at this from the synchromystic perspective, is that who Bruce Willis is talking to in The Sixth Sense is he's talking to himself. You know, this is him. This is the same person, James Cole, Cole Sear. It's all the same. So we're beginning to see this, like, you know, this looping in the first film. And the 12 Monkeys is all about the looping of, like, you know, growing up and becoming this, and then coming, and then repeating the process. And so you want to look at that, I don't know, like, you know, within our lives, how we repeat the same sort of cycles or decision makings. We're going to keep on repeating, you know, this whole sort of Groundhog's Day sort of thing. You could look at it culturally, like how things like keep on repeating. Revolution is just a turning of the wheel, if you will. You know, so there are all sorts of different ways you can look at it, but nonetheless, we can see that it's connected. And we can see now that, you know, in The Sixth Sense, that it's as the conclusion of the film is when Malcolm Crowe realizes who he is. He realizes he's dead. He's a ghost. You know, he's just living this zombie-like existence, thinking he's real, which also is very complementary to this idea of this loop, this time loop. It's always repeating. There's nothing, you know, maybe the details change, but it keeps on going on. So we've got that right there. Obviously, we've got the numbers too. We got 12, and now we've got 6. So it's, you know, we've got those numbers are played upon. Hold on for a moment. Excuse me. And so now let's go a little bit deeper. So The Sixth Sense is, you know, besides the actual the reveal of the film, the fact that young Cole is able to see dead people and communicate with them. The other thing which, you know, tied into it, which is best remembered about the film, is the quote, "I see dead people." You know, this is from, I don't know, this is from something I just searched. I was looking for a quote of the film. And so, you know, we've got like Cole here saying, "I see dead people." And so sure enough, when we go and we look at, you know, in the same place where I was looking at best quotes, what are the best quotes from 12 Monkeys, you could go see this, that James Cole said almost the exact same line. "All I see are dead people." Further supporting this idea of how this is, like, you know, a continuity of stories. You know, we're seeing this James Cole, this Cole Sear story being told from these different perspectives. So we said Philadelphia, we did the names, the dead people quote, the young boy, how they look alike. Oh, they both in both of these films. In both of these films is the fact that Bruce Willis, the Bruce Willis character, dies with a gunshot. I described the 12 Monkeys gunshot, but it's not necessarily seen in The Sixth Sense, but it's implied. We learn that that Malcolm Crowe, the Bruce Willis character in The Sixth Sense, he dies because one of his former patients came to his home and he shoots him. So Bruce Willis then dies again. You know, he dies by gunshot. So we're seeing gunshot wound for a death, and now we're seeing gunshot wound for a death as well. And so the last thing, this kind of like, you know, this is, you know, again, when we are looking at this from a synchromystic perspective, like, you know, normal barriers of how things can connect, you know, they go away just as long as there's a meaningful connection. And then, you know, we can build from there. And so we're also dealing with the virus. And so how do we deal with the virus in the Sixth Sense? Well, the word sense has a lot of different connotations and meanings. So we're going to play around with that for a bit. And we can see that a vital role in the technology, this is real world, real movie, real ARG, I say that a little bit being a little silly when I say real, but what we know of the contemporary modern mRNA vaccine is that its technological breakthrough came from an understanding of antisense therapeutics. And so an antisense ties directly into, the whole mRNA and RNA nomenclature. This is way above my pay grade in terms of, I can't really speak intelligently in terms of, cellular functions, but I do know that that's antisense, or, you could say another way, nonsense, is a big part of the virus storyline, which is taking place in our material reality. And what we're doing is, we kind of grounded our 12 monkeys. The reason why it's significant is because it is a virus film. So we see that virus is implied in a roundabout way, if you will, within the Sixth Sense. So now we're going to move on to the third film in this lineage, or this line, and that is Looper, which came out 13 years following the Sixth Sense. And let's go and look at, we'll do the Sixth Sense to Looper. So let's talk about Looper for a second. Do I have any slide on Looper? Yeah, I do. So Looper came out in 2012. So what's Looper about? Looper stars Bruce Willis, and it takes place further in the future. I want to say like 2045 or something like that. And the Bruce Willis character, he's a hitman in the future, and how this particular style of hit works in the future is they send people back in time, and the younger version of the hitman then kills whoever the target is once they pass through the time travel mechanism. And so what this movie deals with are the two versions of Bruce Willis. We have an older version of Bruce Willis, and he's just known purely as Joe, or Old Joe, and then the younger version, which is played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and he's the young Joe. And so this is very similar. We're seeing the same sort of the same looping as we do within the 12 monkeys. It's a little bit different in terms of the ages and the specific details of the movie plot, but nonetheless, you were dealing with Bruce Willis going back in time, meeting himself, and that sort of stuff. So I'm going to get a little bit more into the Looper plot once I go down the Brad Pitt line, but what I do want to say is the theme within Looper is the character of Joe is very, very self-absorbed. He's very, all he cares about is himself and making certain that, he's taken care of and he gets his own. And the reason why is he had a very neglected childhood, and, that's a predictable sort of personality profile, is that when you've had a very, very neglected childhood, you develop the skill sets to become very self-absorbed because no one else was really looking out for you. So that was this character Joe, and then he goes and he experiences or witnesses unconditional love. And by seeing that, he decides to self-sacrifice. He shoots himself. So now we've got another shooting. We've got young Joe shooting himself to change the timeline, or more accurately, he closes the loop. this reoccurring time loop, which would have been happening in the film Looper. The young Joe shoots himself to collapse the loop, and the reason why he did that was because he moved out of his selfish sort of perspective and became much more concerned about other people. And in doing so, and what the film is all about, if you're familiar with it, is he potentially changes the timeline or the lifeline, whatever you want to call it, of another character who we simply know as the Rainmaker. And the Rainmaker turns out to be this real powerful organized crime character in the future. And we're going to get into that a little bit later, but we see him as a young child, the young version of the Bruce Willis character, Joe, the one played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, is touched by seeing the young Rainmaker, and this is why he sacrifices himself, so that potentially the Rainmaker does not turn out to be whom the Rainmaker seemingly turns out to be. So let's go and look at, all right, so here's the slide with the Looper theme. So it takes place in Kansas. This does not take place in Philadelphia, but Kansas is going to make sense in a little bit. We're dealing with time travel, time loops. We're dealing with a Bruce Willis character going to meeting a younger self. We're also seeing about helping a young boy, and it deals with the sixth sense. So what's the sixth sense? I'll get to that in a moment. So let's hit the number countdown. So we had 12 monkeys. We've got the sixth sense. Now we got 0. Loop as a number could be applied or implied two different numbers, either the number 8 or the number 0. I'm just going to go with the 0 right here. It seems to be this countdown, if you will, by sixes. So then the sixth sense, I talked about sixth sense referring a little bit or implying, or having some connection to vaccine technology. Now we're going to go and look at sixth sense in its surface level meaning, and that is, having a sixth sense. And we talked about the Haley Joel Osment character's sixth sense was that he could talk to dead people. But within the film Looper, or part of the plot, was that some of the characters, and particularly this Rainmaker character more than anyone else, had a very strong telekinetic ability. They just called them TKs in the film, and telekinetic is being able to move things with your mind. Telekinesis is another one of these sixth sense. And what's interesting is it really did not it was not a requirement for the film, I suppose. Like, all of Looper could have been a fine film. I'm not critiquing these in terms of storytelling. I'm pulling out underlying themes which connect through characters and the stories. But the Looper film would have made sense even without this TK, this telekinetic ability. But nonetheless, it was in there. So we have another connection. We have another connection within with the sixth sense. It's probably the strongest one. And then, Bruce Willis helping a young boy, and then Bruce Willis, it's actually the younger Bruce Willis, but he dies by a gunshot wound. And the reason why that collapsed the loop is the younger version, the younger version of the self in Looper, because he killed himself, it then erased the older version. As we saw in 12 Monkeys, the older version of self dies, and that has no impact on the younger, because the younger would eventually become the older, and the loop just goes on and on and on. So this is how the loop was collapsed. So if we want to go and look at this Bruce Willis line, so beginning with 12 Monkeys, in this one of the key elements is this repeating of the storyline, repeating of the same thing over and over again. And then through the Sixth Sense, we learn that the Bruce Willis character recognizes what he is. And then in the Looper, he then stops the cycle. He recognizes, through moving out of a selfish type of perspective, he then is able to collapse this Groundhog's Day loop. And then, it's, who knows what happens in the future, but the self-sacrifice or at least needing to constantly be self-absorbed with one's needs and desires is the way one gets out of this 12 monkeys loop. So now we're going to go and look at the other line in 12 Monkeys, because we have these characters, and I'm even going to suggest that these characters, they're all the same. They're all the same person, different versions. And so we've got Bruce Willis right here with the Brad Pitt character. We're going to follow this Brad Pitt character line. And I guess, do I have it here? Let me see if I can find it. All right. So the Brad Pitt character in 12 Monkeys is portrayed in a personality level, like really, really unstable. Like, just the way he's talking, he doesn't know how to communicate with people who aren't having his reality. And to be quite honest, that's why, a lot of people get locked up. You go and you look at something like schizophrenia. There's no such, schizophrenia is not a thing. There's no like test where they take blood and identify a schizophrenia gene. Schizophrenia is identified by like a series of behaviors, and if you have like 7 out of 12 of them, then you're said to have had schizophrenia. And so if you read about them, a lot of them are like, hearing voices or stuff like that. But the truth of the matter is there's all sorts of people who hear voices but are able to then communicate with the rest of the world in a way that the rest of the world doesn't think they're crazy, and they don't get locked up. But what we see with this Brad Pitt character, I don't know if he's necessarily identified with schizophrenia, but he's the fact that how his personality interacts with the rest of the world is so alarming, or so, people don't like to be around it. That's why it gets locked up. But when you listen to what the character's saying, besides the facial tics and like the speed in which he speaks, he makes sense. He makes sense. And so the character, this Brad Pitt character in 12 Monkeys, what his hot button is, he is very, very anti-corporate, anti-consumerism, and then pro-environment. You listen to all of the things he's saying. He sounds nuts in terms of how he speaks, but like the actual words that are coming out of his mouth, he's got a lot of sound logic. And so the Brad Pitt character in 12 Monkeys really represents an unstable personality. It's not necessarily an unstable mind per se, as much as it is the way it is presented to this outer world. So I say that as the setup to Fight Club. So this Brad Pitt character, then we move to Fight Club. And so probably most of you are familiar with Fight Club. And Fight Club, like The Sixth Sense, they both came out in 1995. And Fight Club, also like The Sixth Sense, was, a big blockbuster. It's probably become more, through time as it became like a cult classic. Everyone knows Fight Club. It was successful, but not quite like The Sixth Sense. But nonetheless, Fight Club is a movie which many people are familiar with. And let's talk about some of the themes within Fight Club. Well, the first thing I want to point out is that, Fight Club takes place in Wilmington, Delaware. got this right here. You know, the film, let's talk about Fight Club right here, takes place in Wilmington, Delaware, where most credit card companies, 70% of Fortune 100 companies are headquartered there. It's also the home of the, you know, the sitting president. Within the film, it never mentions Wilmington by name, but it mentions many other cities in Delaware by name: Newcastle, Delaware City, and Penns Grove, New Jersey. And then there is a screen or an image real quickly within the film where it shows the business card of the Brad Pitt character in Fight Club, Tyler Durden, and it is in Wilmington, Delaware. So there's Wilmington, Delaware. So why is that important? Let's go look at this. We've got, this is where Wilmington is. This is Philadelphia. This is the location of The Sixth Sense. This is the location of 12 Monkeys. And then we've got Baltimore right here. This is also 12 Monkeys. This is where I believe the mental hospital was, and they go from here to here, from Baltimore to Philadelphia, and then right in between is where we find Wilmington, Delaware. And so let's keep on going with this. The Tyler Durden character is he is immensely anti-corporate and anti-consumerism. So he has the same value systems in which we have seen within the character we saw in 12 Monkeys. So, and I thought this was even, I like this. You could go and see, like, you know, this is a screenshot from 12 Monkeys, and this was part of the advertising campaign for Fight Club. And just, like, look at the similarities with the thumbs up and, like, the grin and that sort of stuff. And we could see, you know, here the narrator is talking about how society is trapped by consumerism. Here we see Jeffrey Goins. That's the name of this character right here. He's the mental patient, and he is he's very interested in the environment, and he has very anti-corporate views. Now, you can go and argue, like the way that the Tyler Durden character is presented within Fight Club, that his personality is still considered very unstable. But in comparison of this character, it is much more stable. This character knows how to interact with people. He knows how to go and not just by, he did not have the facial tics, and, you know, was arguably kind of charming. And if anything else, you know, we see within the film that he has enough of a personality that he garners a leadership role. People follow him. They want to be like him. They listen to what he says. But, you know, no one's really listening to him right here. I think I skipped over this piece right here, which is kind of interesting. So Penns Grove, New Jersey was listed in Fight Club. And if you go and you look at the history of Bruce Willis, well, Bruce Willis attended Penns Grove High School, and he grew up in Carneys Point, New Jersey. And that is, I've got a picture of that, yeah, right here. This is Penns Grove. This is Wilmington. So this is where Bruce Willis, you know, is said to have grown up. So we're just like, you know, the spilling over from like realities and all of and places and all this different stuff, you know, it just like adds up, and it's adding up, and it's adding up. So let us return to Fight Club. Different versions of self. So that's kind of like the big reveal in Fight Club. So what we find out in The Sixth Sense is that Bruce Willis turns out to be, you know, dead. You know, that's a big surprise. And then you find out that the two main characters in Fight Club, one played by Brad Pitt, the other played by Ed Norton, they are in fact the same person. Whereas the Tyler Durden, the Brad Pitt character, is this you know, who this Edward Norton character becomes when he blacks out, that, you know, they're the same person. So we're dealing with this. This is one of the themes which we're seeing. We're seeing the same person. That's why I said, you know, these guys are the same person, that Cole Sears and James Sears or James Cole are the same person, where I'm like, well, Bruce Willis and Brad Pitt are the same person, where we see this is the same person, whether we want to look at this as metaphysically or metaphorically, you know, it's the same. We're seeing the same version of person, expressed in different ways. So different versions of self. We have that. Personality stabilizes. We talked about that. Death by shooting. It's, you know, again, I'm not going to try to go in and analyze these films, particularly in a what you see is what you get sort of way, but it's kind of confusing in Fight Club. And what I mean by confusing, it can be interpreted in many different ways, but we know that the Tyler Durden, the Brad Pitt character, and the Edward Norton character, though they're presented in the film as two different characters, they are in fact the same character. The Tyler Durden, it shows like Brad Pitt putting a gun in the mouth of Ed Norton, which, you know, would kind of imply that he's putting it in his own mouth. But we're seeing the same thing, and he shoots him. It's not how he dies, but there's a shooting. I think he dies at the end, but I thought it was like within the collapse of the buildings. You know, I told you I haven't seen these films for a while, but nonetheless, like, you know, there is definitely that gun in the mouth scene. Talked about this. Let's go see right here. And obviously fighting is a big part of this film too. You know, it's called Fight Club, if you're familiar with it. Let's see if we covered all of this. Wilmington to Delaware, anti-corporate, different versions of self, death by death by shooting, personality stabilizing. We talked about that. This is also another little nice little parallel that we see between 12 Monkeys and Fight Club. This is the final scene, or one of the final scenes within 12 Monkeys. The Bruce Willis character attempts to stop a scientist from boarding a plane, and he wants to shoot him because the scientist is going to go around and he's going to spread this virus. But the scientist doesn't get shot, and he goes onto the plane. And so here we see, this is a screenshot of the scientist right here, and he's sitting on a plane and he's having a conversation. And this character right here turns out to be one of the people who send Bruce Willis back in time, and we can see that they're connected. And in the very beginning of Fight Club, we have this scene where Tyler Durden meets Ed Norton, where these two different sides of self meet each other. And, you know, it's this, there's a parallel there. We can see in many different ways these different sort of similarities. But now let's move on to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And so this is a more contemporary film. This film came out in 2019. It's a Quentin Tarantino film, and it stars Brad Pitt. So we're following this Brad Pitt storyline across these different films. And so let's go look at the themes. So Brad Pitt in the movie business. So Brad Pitt in the film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood plays a stunt double to the Leonardo DiCaprio characters. So we know that Brad Pitt is in the movie business, and we also know that the Brad Pitt character is named Cliff Booth, that he lives in a trailer behind a drive-in movie theater. And we also know, this is from the script of Fight Club, we know that Tyler Durden has, he had one part-time job, and that was as a projectionist. He was the guy who would change the reels of film. So we see that Brad Pitt, again, we're looking at this continuity. We see that the Brad Pitt is involved with films. And again, you know, the movie business is, you know, whether mystically or whether metaphorically, you know, is a big part of creating the ARG, which we think of as reality. But nonetheless, we see that the Brad Pitt is always in the movie business. And we see again that it is about two people, or two different versions of the same person. Now this is in Once Upon a Time Hollywood. It is very metaphorical because it is Brad Pitt as the stunt double of Leonardo DiCaprio, and obviously, like, as the stunt double, they're playing the same character. These are two different actors, if you will, who are playing the same different part, but in different ways. And this is very much mirrored with the Tyler Durden and the Edward Norton character. The Edward Norton character as being the same person. Now we can see there is a greater stabilization within the personality of the Brad Pitt character. So like Brad Pitt is totally unstable right here, and then Brad Pitt becomes more stable, but he's still kind of nuts. And then you got Brad Pitt in Once Upon a Time Hollywood. Like he is presented in this film as like maybe to everyone else as being difficult to work with. It's because he just does things his own way. He doesn't take shit from anyone. He is, you know, from the world where we want to have a personality where we are easy to work with and we get along with everyone. The Brad Pitt character is not that, but he is by no means the whether anarchist or just troublemaker, which we see in these other films. So we see this changing of the personality, how we see, you know, this line of Bruce Willis, how he goes down, learns who he is, and then he collapses the feedback loop of repeating the same thing over and over again. We're seeing kind of paralleled within the Brad Pitt character of going, which was once like totally friggin' nuts, to like, no, being able to interact with people all around him, yet still being true to himself, you know, being like, you know, his own person. So, all right, where are we going to go? So Super Fighter. So that's another, that is another continuity within the Brad Pitt character, how we know that it's all related. So we see in Fight Club that Brad Pitt is an excellent fighter. And then we see that again in Once Upon a Time Hollywood. We see that in three different places. So it begins by showing Brad Pitt beating up Bruce Lee. So the film Once Upon a Time Hollywood is a mixture of fiction and real history, or at least the history we're told us. And so this is portrayed within the film as actually Bruce Lee, like when he was Kato in the Batman TV show in the 60s, and here this is supposed to be offset, and we see that the Brad Pitt character beats him up, and then we see the Brad Pitt character beating up a guy at the Manson family, the Manson Ranch, the Spahn Ranch, where the Manson family lived, and this was a part of the film. And then the conclusion of the film, which is Brad Pitt then actually meets the Manson family and stops them from committing the crimes against Sharon Tate. This is a shot from, or a screenshot from that particular fight scene. So we see over and over again that the Brad Pitt character, he's still kind of, quote unquote nuts, but he's like much more grounded in what and whom he is. And he's still this, badass fighter. He could beat up Bruce Lee. He could beat up the folks at the Spawn Ranch, and he beats up all the Manson guys. Also want to point out that Bruce Willis, he made a career comeback by being cast in another Quentin Tarantino film. This was like, Tarantino's really big breakout film, Pulp Fiction, but Bruce Willis plays a fighter in that film. And, we have Brad Pitt here as a fighter, but, arguably fighting's in all of Quentin Tarantino's film. But nonetheless, I want to point that out. So, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a film ultimately about the changing of historical timelines. And this can be seen very much parallel to what we saw in Looper, because the character in Looper, by shooting himself, by stopping the continuous loop, he affected the outcome. We don't know in the film, but it's implied that there is at least the potential for the outcome to be different of who this Rainmaker character is. And the conclusion of this Once Upon a Time Hollywood is that the Brad Pitt character is able, on the night in which the Manson family was going to break into Roman Polanski's house, whom the Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio character were living next door, they stopped it from happening. So because they stopped that from happening, there's an implied change in the timeline, because, that didn't happen. We don't know if it's a good thing. We don't know if it's a bad thing, but we know that there's a change. So we see that the Brad Pitt character is tied into changing of timelines. That's what all of this is about. We're talking about like changing of timelines by both, collapsing the loop, and then also at the same time, like stabilizing, like all of this, like, I'm going to just say stabilizing the personality. It's more than that, but I'm just going to say that for, just where I am in this presentation. So the last piece in which I want to talk about Once Upon a Hollywood has to do with the Dalton Gang and John Wilkes Booth. And this is really good stuff. Where are we? Right here. All right. I'm not certain why I put this slide here. Oh, this was... I do want to point this out. So this is when like, the scene of this is talking about the film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and takes place in 1969. And the 69 is a numerical reverse of 96, which is when we have the beginning of, which is the 12 Monkeys, which is 96. We've got all this kind of like, hidden in the back, synchromystic connections. So this is what I want to talk about. So we've got this one scene where Brad Pitt goes to the Spawn Ranch, which, as we're told through history, where the Manson family lived. And the Brad Pitt character was like, hey, the events of the film brought him to the Spawn Ranch, and he sees the Manson family are living there, and he's like, hey, I used to work here, I used to do stunts here, let me go and make certain you guys aren't taking advantage of George Spahn. And so he goes and he finds George Spahn, and he has this one scene where he sits with George Spahn. He's like, hey, George, I just want to make certain everything's okay. And so this is the script from that one part. So George Spahn, this character here, says, who are you? Talking to Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt, as we see, is Cliff Booth. Leonardo is Rick Dalton, is the character. And so he's like, Spahn's like, who are you? Cliff Booth says, it's Cliff Booth. I just wanted to stop by and say hello, see how you're doing. Spahn says, John Wilkes Booth. He's like, no, Cliff Booth. And then he says, who's that? I used to shoot Bounty Law here, George. So Bounty Law was like a TV show, which in the film they used to, he was a stuntman on that film. And he was the stuntman. This is where he first met the Leonardo DiCaprio character, who is Rick Dalton. He's like, I used to shoot Bounty Law here, George. I was Rick Dalton's stunt double. Rick Dalton is Leonardo DiCaprio, who in the film lives next door to Roman Polanski, and it was Roman Polanski's wife who was murdered in the Grizzly Manson murders. You know, that's the history which we're given. And so then George Spahn says again, Rick who? And so the answer is Rick Dalton. And his response is the Dalton brothers. So we're given here in the script, we're given two resonators, if you will, with Cliff Booth and Rick Dalton, one being John Wilkes Booth and the other being the Dalton boys. So let's start with this one right here. So I don't want to get into like the whole thing, like who is John Wilkes Booth? Everyone knows who John Wilkes Booth is. The one thing which we can say for certain is that the history which has been given to us has been given to us. So everything which you know should be in question, and that there's probably other versions of that story, but nonetheless, we know the John Wilkes Booth story. And I want to just point out this one line where it's talking about John Wilkes Booth. Booth was not the only person to object to Lincoln's actions. He was, however, the one who dared to act on his beliefs. So that is what we're seeing with this Cliff Booth character, is what's being implied. You know, this is a man who walks to his own, to his beliefs, regardless of what those beliefs are. You know, he has integrity where his actions are at least in alignment with his belief system. So we know that about John Wilkes Booth. If we want to go and look a little bit deeper at John Wilkes Booth, you know, where was he born? He was born in Bel Air, Maryland. So we can go and look on this map right here. Well, where's Bel Air, Maryland? Well, this is Wilmington, this is Philadelphia, this is Baltimore, and this is where we find the town of Bel Air, Maryland. Now, if you're familiar with the Susquehanna mystery, this is Aberdeen Proving Grounds. This is the Chesapeake Bay, where, you know all roads lead back to the Susquehanna. But we've got that going on right there. And if we want to go one step deeper, do I have this here? Where do I have this? So we've got John Wilkes Booth tied to Bel Air, Maryland right here. And just to make things a little bit even more, you know, lined up, back in Fight Club, the other version of Brad Pitt was played by actor Ed Norton. And if you go and you look at, like, you know, Ed Norton's history, we see that Ed Norton is his great-grandfather is Willard Goldsmith Rouse. And where is Willard Goldsmith Rouse from? He is from Bel Air, Maryland. So again, we've got it's all in this. This is where the Susquehanna comes in and meets the Chesapeake, and then this is where the Delaware comes in and becomes the Delaware Bay. And there's this area right here. There's so much going on right here, but just want to point that out. So we've got that. But the second point, let's go back to what I was talking about. So the second resonator with these names, which is given to us through this script here, is that of the Dalton brothers. And so who are the Dalton brothers? The Dalton brothers made up something which was known as the Dalton Gang. And so it was a group of outlaws in the American Old West in this 1890-92. They were known as the Dalton brothers. They were known for their train robberies. They also have a link to the Jesse James gang. They all were like kind of in the same place. In fact, they were related through the younger younger family line. And so we see these folks are they are quite literally, they are an organized crime family. You know, it's a family. They're literally families, and they are a grouping, and they are in Kansas. They live in Kansas City, and you know, one of them is another Cole. We got Cole in here. We've got the Dalton brothers right here. And so the reason why this is particularly interesting is, if you recall when I was talking about Looper takes place in Kansas, and it has to do with the a Kansas City crime syndicate. So Joe worked for a Kansas City crime syndicate. So now we see in this film they are linking right here Rick Dalton. And remember, Rick Dalton and Charles and Cliff Booth, they represent the same person, because Cliff Booth is the stuntman, if you will, of Rick Dalton. And now we have this resonator with Rick Dalton, with the Dalton brothers, and the Dalton brothers are an actual crime family, tied into Kansas, which is where we go, which is where our Looper story takes place. And just to go and make it even more interesting, the Dalton brothers, they came to their demise. Came to, I thought I had other pictures, but I can't find them. Their demise came during a double bank robbery in Coffeesville, Kansas. We could also see like the family began in Kansas City. And what we have right here is, this is Coffeeville, Kansas right here. Kansas City is a little bit up right here. You can't see it in this picture. But if you go and you look at Brad Pitt's, where was he born and raised? He was born and raised in, in Oklahoma, right down around here, but then he was raised in Springfield, Missouri. So like all in this Dalton family, Dalton organized crime family, in the same spacing of all of that. So, okay, what is all of this about? We can see through this link of of everything I put out, but most strongly grounded in this Kansas City, this Dalton brothers and Kansas City crime syndicate of loopers, is that Cliff Booth is the Rainmaker. Okay, so let's go into what and whom the Rainmaker is, because the Rainmaker is what Looper was all about. Like Looper told the story of young Joe, but its implication is the Rainmaker. So who is the Rainmaker? Let's go into this. This also is from the script. Old Joe, have you heard of the Rainmaker? The young Joe. Seth said that the other night. The new boss is from the future. And so he says, the Rainmaker came out of nowhere and in the span of 6 months took total control of the 5 major syndicates. There are no pictures of him. It's insane. There's stories of him. He has a synthetic jaw, things like that. But word spread quick about him through the ex-Looper grapevine, and even before his mass executions and vagrant purges and reign of terror, because the first thing he did was start closing the loops. All of them, exterminating the whole programming, cleaning house, which is more or less what we see Cliff Booth doing. He's cleaning house. And so what we know from this film is, here's the kid who grows up to be the Rainmaker. And the Rainmaker is shown to have immense telekinetic powers. Like this was his sixth sense, and that's why he came out of nowhere, why he was able to be so powerful, is because he had these abilities. And so what we see happen within Looper is this little kid who, on the timeline which this occurs, where he comes out and he starts killing everyone, it's because the Rainmaker as a boy saw his mother shot. and killed in front of him. And the young Joe, did not have a mother when he was growing up, and he knew that storyline. And so what he did was, by shooting himself, the young Joe, the young Bruce Willis character, the Gordon Levitt character, he stopped Bruce Willis from shooting the mother, which then this young boy would have seen, and then he would have grown up just like young Joe. But because the Gordon Levitt character shot himself, the Bruce Willis character then dematerializes right before he was going to shoot the mother, and then this Rainmaker never goes down that path. He is raised with a mother. Certainly had, we don't know what he's going to become, but we do know that that one particular experience does not happen. So what we see within this entire film, and the reason why I'm telling you this, why am I going through all of this? Why did I put the effort into telling this story and pulling up all of these parts, is because we're finding ourselves right now, in shared experience realities. We're in a weird spot. We don't know what's happening. We're beginning to clearly see what's real, what's not real. We're beginning to see changes within individuals. And, I would say for myself, I would say for anyone who this material resonates with, we are being faced with some very, very important existential, experiential questions, which is, what are you gonna do? We are becoming aware of this loop. We don't want to see this loop repeated over and over and over again. That is the Bruce Willis storyline. And so we see what and whom we are, and then how is it that we decide to close that loop? Because in all of these films, it's this is true for all dream interpretation, which is more or less what we're doing here, is each character in your dream is you. As we're looking at this, each of these characters are us. And so we're the Rainmaker. We are the good guy and the bad guy. We are Bruce Willis. We are Brad Pitt. We're all of these same different characters. And so what we can see in this film, what is being offered to us, what message is being offered to us, is that through the recognition of the loops, of the repeating of the cycles, and recognizing whom and what we are, and again, you answer that mystically, you answer that metaphorically, you answer that metaphysically, any way you want, but by recognizing who you are, and then stepping out of this, this self-absorption. That's what we see in Looper. So the self-absorption is believing what not who you are, believing the story of who you think you are. I mean, that's the whole thing with these false realities of the personality of, we have all created personality. That's, part of the human experience. We create personality based upon our earliest childhood experiences, and we learn to create personas to survive in the world, if you will. And then we identify with the personality, and then we believe we are the personality. And when you want to go into the whole idea of ego death, there's a lot of different ways in terms of taking it, but ultimately what the ego death story is about is recognizing you aren't your personality, and recognizing how your personality has been created. And yes, it served you, but then eventually it becomes your master. And then it just repeats itself. So there's this part of the storyline is recognizing how we were born into a system, and recognizing who we were in that system, and recognizing the system for what it is, and then allowing it to collapse, particularly not just the system, but then also who we are in the system. And by doing so, this Rainmaker, it has a new potentiality. It has a new potentiality. What I described right there was, this particular line. But then at the other line is this line also, is because at the same time, being part of, it is not a good indication of mental health to be well adjusted to a sick society. And that's what this whole Brad Pitt character is being very ill-fitted to society, and being less ill-fitted to society, and then being true to oneself, and then still being able to fit into society. And so when we tie these two different storylines together and we realize it's all the same, we realize that Cliff Booth is the Rainmaker and is Bruce Willis, and it's all this link, that this is what it's pointing to at this moment in time. This moment in time of, like, we don't know what the future holds, but are we going to repeat it? Or do we allow it to collapse? And we've seen collapses on the Fight Club aspect, like, you know, collapsing of society itself, but then also that of us as individuals, you know, the collapse of that to then be able to step into, you know, whatever the Rainmaker may be. I don't think, you know, that story hasn't been written yet. And so I guess that's how I want to go and wrap up this one particular episode of our Syncromystic movie storytelling. There's a lot of interpretations. You know, you could go and add in, we could spend the rest of our lives here just adding in more and more Bruce Willis and Brad Pitt stories, particularly ones that go and dovetail into the one which I've just laid out right here. You know, the end of the day is, you know, we're waking up from the dream, and we're all waking up from it right now. So this is the conclusion. This is Uncle Mike. I'm happy to be back. I hope that everyone's well. I look forward to reading your comments, and I look forward to discovering what it is that we are going to this new storyline, which, you know, we're going to be stepping into. So until next time, enjoy the ride.